So to give you an example, and this is very much related to our subject here, we have 400,000 houses in slums, 400,000. And these slums are mainly in the suburbs. What's the problem? The problem is jobs are in the city center and people are living in the borders, in the suburbs. So among many other problems, we have transportation problems, we have infrastructure problems. For you to have an idea, there are districts that have 300 times less jobs than other districts. So one of the City Hall's activity is to bring more housing for the city centers and more jobs to the suburbs. So we are trying to get more equalities in the distribution of opportunities in the cities. Another very important thing is that we are building more houses so we have less slums. In the previous terms, in 4 years, only 4,000 houses were built. In this term, in 4 years, we're gonna have 40,000 new houses for poor people. How are you doing that? Instead of only building houses, we are buying apartments for these people. So we are getting a faster system to provide housing for poor people. And we are also refurbishing and retrofitting buildings in the city center so we can avoid having empty houses, whereas people are without houses. I'm sorry, I'm going very, very fast. I want to go now through a specific program that I was asked to present. This is called Green Sampa. This is an acceleration program to have more businesses developing clean tech solutions and solutions to adapt to climate change. But the key idea here is that we have an old dump site that was abandoned with an incinerator. This place was closed, and we now have this place as a symbolic building for regeneration and for clean tech push in the city. So here you see in the top left the dump site, how it was, and here on the right side you see how it is now. Here you see all the garbage in front of the incinerator, and this is the building how it is now as an accelerator for startups. Here you see inside the building, we use it as a co-working space and a space for startups to have all the support they need to develop the business they are initiating with clean tech solutions. You see it here. So the place itself is an example of regeneration, but it's pushing talent people, and usually these talent people do not have access, do not have opportunities because they are poor people, they are people who are not financed by the banking system. So we are affording the development of innovation and new solutions for climate change with public money in a space that was a dump site and now is an example of regeneration. So we are directly dealing with 11 of SDGs, and 6 others are indirectly addressed. So we have solutions developed in this space for sanitation, water, waste, transportation, agriculture, air quality, and whatever you can imagine.
I'm extremely sorry, but you run out of time and you have to conclude.
The distribution of time was so unfair in this panel. But anyway, just to finish saying that we have accelerated many startups, and we have 400 stakeholders working with São Paulo City Hall in this program. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and please next time a better balance of time.
Thank you. I'm really sorry with the last speakers for the timing. All the presentations were extremely inspiring and insightful, and we'll make them available with authorization of the presenters. Thank you again to all speakers and audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to announce that the next event actually has started 7 minutes ago, but if you don't mind just staying seated, you will see the opening remarks of the Executive Director of UNHabitat, and I invite you to stay. The event is called No Solutions for Me Without Me. It is focusing on actually the scaling up opportunities of resilience measures that are coming from the bottom-up approach, from our citizens itself. It's voices from the city. So I hope this keeps you engaged and keeps you here. I'm handing over to the moderator. Niklas, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, dear friends and colleagues, sorry for a little bit delay in starting this event, but we'll try our level best to catch up the time again. So, my name is Niklas Hagelberg. I'm the Global Coordinator for UNEP's climate change work, and I will be moderating the session today. The session today will focus on UN's efforts on climate justice through local action in cities. I would like to thank UN Habitat for bringing us together for this event today, and also the UN agencies that are co-organizing this event. UN Capital Development Fund, UN Development Program, UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and UN University, the Institute for Environment and Human Security. As the headline title of today's event, No Solutions for Me Without Me, describes well what we will be discussing about today. The need for putting communities at the center of the climate action debate and effort. Millions of city dwellers already now are at the front lines of climate risk, and we know that in 2019, for example, 356,000 people died from excess heat in urban areas. And going into 2050, 1.6 billion people in urban areas will be suffering from extreme heat, and an estimated of 650 million urban citizens will face water security. Recognizing these threats and the factor of rapid urbanization, it is crucial to invest in building resilience of urban communities and help them with their efforts. So give them the tools, help them with the resources and political clout to move forward in building their resilience. The international community and the UN system has a role to play in this, and today we will hear a little bit more about this role and these examples. But today we will also focus on the multitude of examples that local and national governments and civil society and the UN can take to successfully together build resilience and take climate action. To help us frame the discussion and kickstart us off today, I would like to invite the Executive Director of UN Habitat and UN Under-Secretary General, Madame Maimunah Mohd Sharif, to present opening remarks for us. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Honorable Minister Matthew Samuda from Jamaica, Honorable Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner from Brisbane, distinguished Speaker Adessou Kossivi Naveame and Theresa Carampatana, colleagues from UN Habitat, UNCDF, UNDP, UNDRR, UNEP, and UNU, friends, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon for those who are here in this room, and a good morning, afternoon, and evening for those who are online together with us today. It is my pleasure to be part of this UN event, one UN event at COP27, alongside 3 distinguished speakers. I thank all the UN agencies that have supported this organization of this event. This year, COP27 has adopted the slogan, Together for Implementation. It's very clear, together for implementation of the Paris Agreement. And it is imperative that our implementation pathways addressing the climate crisis consider climate justice at their core. Our global ambitions will be doomed to fail if we don't prioritize the most vulnerable in our cities and human settlement. Hence, I would like to quote my sister, Rose Malokwane from Slum Dwellers International, who said for the first time, and I heard it myself, from the 11th World Urban Forum to the world leaders, no solution for me without me. I think that is the title of our discussion today. I would like to congratulate my sister Rose for this. So I think this title is very, very meaningful. You can imagine no solution for me without me. If we ourselves is not involved in changing our behavioral, changing our mindset, then there will be no change. That whatever that we are preach, whatever that we put in the resolution, whatever we put in the outcome, whatever you put in the decision. So I think this is the time for us to implement, in time to us for act. So discussion on climate justice in cities are often framed around what is lacking in services or resources. This regarding the power of local climate action to build climate resilience. Climate justice entails ensuring representation, inclusion, and the protection of the rights of the most vulnerable to the effect of climate change. Solutions must promote equity, access to basic services, and ensure that young people can live, learn, play, and work in a healthy and clean environment. Our World Cities Day 2022, the culminations of Urban October, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, quote unquote, the actions cities take locally to create a sustainable world will reverberate globally. That's why our theme of the World Cities Day, act local to go global. Act local in order to achieve the global commitment. And the World Habitat Day theme is that mind the gap. The gap is moving away from us, not closing. Mind the gap, leaving no one and no place behind. So to the transition to a just, inclusive environment in cities must be community needs at the forefront. To effectively address these challenges, the COP27 presidency has invited UN Habitat to support the development and implementation of the COP27 initiative called Sustainable Urban Resilience for the Next Generation, or in short, SURGE. In this, we share two fundamental convictions. Local climate action is imperative, and to be successful, a broad range of partners need to be mobilized. This initiative will be launched tomorrow. Please, you can join us tomorrow. There is through the link for the registration at the first of its kind ministerial meeting on urbanization and climate change under leadership of the COP27 presidency, hosted by the Egyptian Ministry of Housing and supported by UN Habitat. The ministerial meeting will be the foundation to create long-term legacy and representation of urban issues in the climate negotiation. Combined with the SURGE initiative, it will help bring the implementation of the Paris Agreement to the key actors on the ground. Let's keep building the momentum towards the breakthrough on local climate action. Join us today to discuss examples of community resilience and how policymakers and our UN partners can work together with communities, with people on the ground to scale up local climate action. I welcome you to join the UN's effort on climate justice through local action in cities. Shukran, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Under Secretary General and Executive Director of the UN Habitat. In trying to get back on our schedule, we'll move directly over to the next part of the agenda. We have three groups of speakers that will focus on three different topics. In the first group of speakers, we will focus on how can UN organizations work together to achieve parity between climate adaptation and mitigation. And in the group that will discuss this particular matter, we have Honorable Matthew Samuda, the Minister of Economic Growth and Job Creation in Jamaica. We have Mr. Adessou Kossivi, the Acting Regional Lead for Africa, Global Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction. And we have Ms. Cerin Kizhakkethottam, Program Management Officer. And Cerin did tell me how to say her name, and I still struggled, so I'm so sorry, Cerin. And in the second group, we will focus on how can we enhance resilience to climate risks with community-led solutions. And we will look at how to empower local stakeholders and include local governments and communities in climate action. And with us discussing that particular topic, we have Mrs. Theresa Carampatana, who is the member of the Slum Dwellers International Board and president of the Philippines Homeless People Federation. And we have Mayor of Brisbane, Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner from Australia. And the third panel will look at how we can unlock climate finance for the most vulnerable communities. And to discuss that, we're joined by Ms. Sophie de Coninck, Climate Facility Manager for the local Climate Adaptive Living Facility, Local. And Mr. Sönke Kreft, who leads the work at the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative. And with that, I would like to jump into the first topic, and I'll remind you of the topic again. How can UN organizations work together to achieve parity between climate adaptation and mitigation? And Honorable Minister, you're first up. And the question I would like to pose to you is, and you can either speak from here, I can give you the microphone, or if you want to go up, both are options. So the question for you is, how do innovative solutions for adaptation and mitigation differ, and how can the climate parity between these be achieved? That's perfect, thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, Chairman, and indeed acknowledging all the members of the head table, and we'll dive straight into it. The concept of parity between adaptation and mitigation emerged to give greater attention to adaptation. In considering the intent of the convention, it is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The objective is to do so in a manner that prevents dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. Given the fact that we have missed this mark, adaptation becomes even more critical. We acknowledge that parity is about equity, equal treatment, but not necessarily equal allocation of time, resources, technology, or capacity. However, parity is subjective. It is not to determine whether parity is reached, given that it is based on local and national circumstance. Finance, both availability and access modalities, data availability, among others. Any consideration of whether it is achieved or not will largely be dependent on how it is perceived. The UNSG has called for a 50% share of climate finance to be allocated to adaptation. It was in recognition that the majority of finance was allocated purely to mitigation. In the 5th Biennial Assessment and Overview of Climate Finance Flows, prepared by the Standing Committee on Finance, mitigation has received the largest share of resources, approximately 57%, compared with adaptation receiving 28% in the same period. Cross-cutting finance for adaptation and mitigation was at approximately 15%. While it is difficult to say that 50% adaptation achieves parity, it is clear that adaptation is behind mitigation. The decisions made at COP26 in Glasgow included a commitment to doubling adaptation finance. This is, we believe, one way to improve parity. There is also the issue of unmet mitigation goals. Committed GHGs means changes will happen, even if all emissions stop today. That amplifies the need not only for more ambitious mitigation measures, but also significant adaptation investment. Now, friends and family, what this generally means is that we need to put in significantly more money into both efforts. The UNEP Emissions Gap Report of 2022 states, policies currently in place with no additional action are projected to result in global warming of 2.8 degrees Celsius over the 21st century. Implementation of the existing NDC scenarios reduce this to between 2.4 and 2.6 degrees Celsius. That is devastating. When considering the impact of a 1.1 degree Celsius world, as we currently are in, there has already been limits to our ability to adapt. It then begs the question, if climate action is not taken seriously, what then of the limits of adaptation in the future? The climate change conversation can no longer reside just with adaptation and mitigation, but also with addressing loss and damage. Loss and damage are happening as we speak, happening more frequently. Science and evidence show that limits to adaptation have been and are being exceeded in some cases. The duality of adaptation and mitigation is no longer what should be the status quo, but instead a tripartite system to include addressing loss and damage. In Jamaica, we have many examples. We've had the loss of beaches. The world-famous Hellshire Beach has all but disappeared. It was the first discussion I ever had about climate change with Ms. Una May Gordon. We've seen the displacement of persons following extreme events. Rising sea levels are indeed claiming some communities. Loss of productivity during drought events and indeed flood events. Massive damage to infrastructure from flood events. Now, the topic, and I congratulate the organizers, no solution for me without me, is an idea that is linked to the question of parity. I believe it does two things. It speaks to moving from problem to solution, and it recognizes that each voice has value. The design of solutions to take climate change must be tailor-made, built for the people, by the people. We believe, as Jamaica's team, that the local mechanism is unique in assisting local governments in designing the best solutions to meet their unique circumstance, but also to have greater capacity for tapping into financial resources such as performance-based climate resilience grants to implement various measures. The preliminary activities being pursued in Jamaica under local will involve engagement activities with various local level stakeholders, including local authorities and community representatives. In referring to local, I would have introduced another part of the parity equation, that of scale and location. It introduces key questions, colleagues. Does national level parity automatically translate to local level parity? What about local level communities with unique circumstances? Are solutions in one area or location possible for another in an equitable manner? In the end, solutions must be people-centric. Securing lives are of the utmost importance. If we believe that no solution for me should come without me, then we also have to urgently address the issue of climate education. And we will also have to look at the curriculum of our students from the primary and secondary level to ensure that they are conscious of the discussions that are taking place, so that citizens are able to contribute meaningful suggestions based on meaningful understanding. I know several organizations present at COP27 are involved in such. One such, Take Action Global, but there are others. This is particularly important. The decisions must be made to include the people, be designed for the people, and eventually be implemented by the people. All of society must be involved, and to be involved, they must be educated and guarded with the facts. Making resilient infrastructure and cities generally supports sustainable solutions for people to continue to operate businesses, reside safely, while enjoying social graces and spaces. In essence, it cannot be that we just want to survive. It has to also be what is our route to thrive. In closing, it is fair to say that achieving parity is a subjective matter, but beyond adaptation and mitigation, the discussion should not forget addressing loss and damage. And I thank you for the opportunity to contribute.
Thank you, Minister Samuda. And as we're running a little bit late, I want to thank both the Minister and the Executive Director for UN Habitat, if you may go a little bit early from the session. So thank you so much for your participation. And the longer you can stay, the better for us. Okay, with that, I would like to go over to Mr. Adessou Kossivi. And Adessou, I would like to ask for you to share your examples of where communities implemented both adaptation and mitigation solutions at the local level, and what barriers have these communities faced? And if we could all now speak from the podium, that saves us a second or two. Adessou, the podium is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm okay. I will sit here. Maybe before I respond to the main question, I want to make a comment, because when I was going through the terms of reference, I've seen that you put community and cities. And I want to say, as someone coming from Africa, that cities are different from local communities for us. For the simple reason that when you live in a local community where life is becoming impossible or life has no pity with you, then you move from the local community to a city because you just consider the city as more resilient. So for me, cities and local communities don't mean the same thing in this context. And it's important because vulnerability, you know, and yeah. Now coming to the question, I will take you, we'll travel together from here to Niger and later to Burkina Faso, where we have implemented a project called CBDRM, Community-Based Disaster Risk Management, where we've really worked with the communities, first of all, to understand how they foresee vulnerability, how they understand resilience, and what are the tools that they have at their own level to build their resilience. So in Niger, we had a project with a small organization trying to restore a hill called Ferry. That hill is the only hope that the community of Tillaberi has in terms of hope to see rain, you know, because the hill has a very small forest. That's because of the pressure of the humanity is disappearing, and it's important to restore that forest on that hill. First of all, to protect the hill itself, but to ensure that the herders can continue to feed the animals and the human being can continue to benefit from a microclimate that will give some rare rains during the year. In Burkina Faso, we work with a group of women in the region of Po, where we try to support them because these women are facing a lot of challenge and at the same time don't have the resources to meet their need. And they decide to come together and promote the transformation of the she border. For those who know, Burkina Faso is known for the quality of its she. And in the Po region, we know that first of all, Burkina Faso is a Sahel country, so the environment is not always clement with them. And in that zone, women decide to promote the transformation of the she. So first of all, they need the plant of the she. They need to have access to the material, to the fruits themselves. But also they need to have a system, a kind of machine in place that they can use to transform this she to have the butter that they can sell to pharmacies. And there are a lot of developed country pharmacies that come for the business. But yeah, this community need, first of all, resources to install these industries to produce in a quantity, but also the trees themselves on the ground to be able to benefit from that. So we support them, and during this process, we understand that the women, they have a strong knowledge on the transformation. They have strong capacities. The only thing that they may not have is the resources. And with them, it's unfortunate to say that the banking system is not supportive to these women, because the banking system is asking for a lot of documents that these women cannot provide. That's the first problem. Secondly, as we are in the world of UN here, it's also important that to mention that sometimes the feeling is the UN system is quite far from the reality on the ground. So the UN system generally deal with the decision makers in the capital city and ignore what is happening on the ground. Now, coming to some of the difficulties, because we are talking about time, I want to be brief. I want to, apart from the resource that I've mentioned and the relations between the decision makers, including the UN system and the ground, I can also mention that these women need to formalize their business. And the business is not formalized. So you can see, we are working on a very random system. The day we have the material, then we can survive. And the day we don't have, so the system is not sustainable. That's the second point I can mention. I can also say that we need to find a mechanism where we shift the knowledge from the top to the local level, because they have the capacity, they have probably the knowledge, but they may not have the needed resources to afford, to respond to their needs. So there's a mechanism where we shift the power from the central level to the bottom level in order to give that insurance to these women and to sustain the activities. It's also important to mention the degradation of the environment and also the adverse climate-related impact on the ground. So, for example, in Burkina Faso or in Niger, as I said, the climate is not clement, and there are some very, I would say there are some natural events that become very quickly disaster. So from the threat, they become disaster simply because there is no infrastructure to contain those kind of systems. So it's important to give the chance to these communities to be in a resilient environment and to transform the environment to a safer place for them, because there is no resilience without security. And these people, they are not ready to move. They want to sit there, but they want to live in a security and be able to transform their environment to survive. Finally, let me mention the mechanisms of resource mobilization are not always friendly. So I said it already. It's important to find a mechanism, a soft mechanism where people can have access to resources and to also accompany these people to transform the environment in order to build their resilience, because we are not entitled to build the resilience of people. People need to build their own resilience because they know better their needs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adessou, and I think your example demonstrates well how we can actually deliver both adaptation and mitigation in one go. So, for example, with nature-based solutions and restoration of the hillside in Niger. And I also like the connection that you made on transferring knowledge to local communities, and I believe that also connects to Minister Samuda's notion on the importance of education. So that's another element. And I also take to heart that UN can be quite distant from these communities. So I have it down on my paper as well. Okay, thank you so much. So then I would like to invite Cerin to also touch on very close, the question is very close to what I asked Adessou. So can you share examples of where both adaptation and mitigation solutions have been implemented, and what are the benefits from implementing both? And we are catching up on the time frame, so if you could keep up the pace, that would be great.
I'll try my best. Thank you so much, Nick. It was really excellent to hear the remarks already before, because I think a lot of what I wanted to say was already covered so excellently that I do not want to repeat, and hopefully that leads to saving some of the time again. So how do you actually have parity in your projects and in your portfolio as such? There are two things I would like to highlight. And one thing has been already mentioned by the executive director in her opening remarks. It's also a way of like, how do we actually do our programmatic approach in the UN that is not too far away from the people and the benefits itself, while also being actually on that parity note between adaptation and mitigation. And one thing what I like to stress on that level is we came from a portfolio at UN Habitat that's called Rise Up, Resilient Settlements for the Urban Poor. And it looked very much on adaptation and vulnerability and where we can actually enhance resilience of the most vulnerable, mostly in informal settlements, through like a methodology based on vulnerability assessment, action planning, prioritization, and then designing actually adaptation measures. But through the course of time and understanding also the negotiations and the development or the science from IPCC, we realized there is a need to actually shift to climate resilient development rather than having one adaptation measure after the other. And that's also the key message that IPCC is putting forward in their two reports launched this year. That message said, from Rise Up, that flagship what we had, we realized there is also that tipping point that how better we do our mitigation and how best we can be in our mitigation measures, we will always need to adapt. If we have achieved our mitigation measures all by today, the world is still already on the path, the tipping point, and adaptation is still needed massively. So that parity kind of like formulates actually our programmatic approach, and that was actually the backbone of designing a new initiative called SURGE, Sustainable Urban Resilience for the Next Generation. And that is the initiative that's also supported by the COP27 presidency and is going to be launched tomorrow. One of the core principles of that initiative is actually having that parity in place for every intervention that you're planning to do. It focuses on 5 sectors without being siloed, which is urban water, urban energy, urban mobility, housing and construction, and urban waste. In each of those sectors, there are principles in place and overarching principles in place to ensure that actually adaptation is addressed as much as mitigation. If I look at urban waste, for example, then everyone would think, oh yeah, that is a natural GHG emission pathway that I can put in place. But actually, so much of the flooding is also contributed by clogged drainages and canals and so on that then spread over, which is your adaptation measure. So there are co-benefits to each measure, and that's the thinking we need to really change, that when we put one measure in place, we always need to think, what is my co-benefit? So for either for adaptation or mitigation side, to become holistic in my approach. And that's also what a city needs, a holistic and a systemic approach. So we hope SURGE can be a vehicle for that. And luckily by today, we have over 117 organizations signed up to SURGE, the initiative, and that within 3 months' time. So I really invite you all to join that initiative. You'll find the links to register, join tomorrow's launch, just to be part of that momentum. Because as said also by my previous speaker, to bring all of these intervention to the ground, we need all of us in there. It's not only one UN approach or one UN agency or one national government. In the SURGE initiative, we have non-state actors, we have local governments represented, and national government represented, as well as international organizations. So everyone has a saying to define what we define as success of that initiative itself, and hopefully, we will achieve with that also the parity between adaptation and mitigation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cerin. So that concludes our first group of focus. So how we can achieve climate parity between adaptation and mitigation. And I think we heard that there's still quite some distance to meet the adaptation needs. There are people on the ground, local government and communities, whether that's in urban areas or in rural areas, that can deliver. There are opportunities for deliver climate action that delivers both on adaptation and mitigation. So there's even almost like the bigger bang for the buck opportunities there. So then we move to the next focus area or next topic and group of speakers. And we would like to see how we can scale up community-based resilience. And first I would like to go to Theresa, and I would like to ask you that what are the barriers you faced in scaling up efforts in slum upgrade and building adaptation efforts in slums? What are the things that you have taken? Oh, sorry, I was missing you there. So could you share some of your experiences? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I came from the Philippines, so we are composed of 106 community-based organizations that are all slum dwellers. In the global South part, we are also part of Slum Dwellers International, wherein we are 33 countries who are involved in resilient upgrading, community-based adaptation, housing for the poor, and all those stuff. So this, the group that I represent are the people who contribute very less in the carbon emissions, but suffer the brunt of the impacts of climate change. So in our case, there are a lot of barriers though. There are so many that we can think of. But I think for us, we already stopped, blaming other people, and we pose ourselves as solution seekers in this juncture, because we know that if we cannot build from below, then the climate impacts in our communities will, we will just count bodies of dead people in the next years, because these communities are living in dangerous places, like under transmission lines, under the bridges. They are in the riverbanks and coastal areas. So just imagine during COVID how the communities, how the communities suffer. But yeah, for us, the most, I think the biggest hurdle that we have to face is that we are looked at as problems, not part of the solution. If just the society, see people in the communities as solution seekers, as partners in development, I think 1/2 of the problem is solved. Because if you rally these people, if you seek their expertise, their opinions, their experience of what is happening to them during these kinds of calamities, you can have a very robust system to follow and to implement. But since the people are not taken as solution seekers, they are seen as problems, then it's very difficult to really bring people together, government, community leaders, to plan for whatever impacts that climate change will have the effect in the community. So for our case, the biggest part of our job really, or our services for the community, is the organizing part, where we build their capacities to ask their governments to make their governments accountable, to negotiate with government how the government can plan with the community. Of course, we're not saying this is a silver bullet, but for the past 20 years that SDI and the Homeless People's Federation Philippines has been in this space, we are able to, we are able to develop strategies with the community that build their resilience, and actually up to now, they are now part of the people who are also doing things on their own for their own community. So I think we have to multiply. We have to, transfer skills by way of influencing other community practitioners. These community leaders are powerful speakers, powerful innovators in the climate space. So I think, of course, there is a big gap in the finance, because these communities needs a lot of support. But I think it's negotiable. I think they will not ask for government to give them heaven and earth when government cannot afford it. But it should be a dialogue, a continuous dialogue between these groups of people. So what I'm saying is that the UN system must be, must adopt the locally led adaptation strategies, which should focus on accessible finance to the people. And this finance strategy should be patient, because you cannot say a community, we start a project today and then make them resilient in the next 6 months, because that is part of your lag frame or whatever framework you're using. So it should be patient, because sometimes politics can have a very large influence in building resilience. Policies in the government can have a big hurdle for the communities to adopt to. So, so this must be accessible, patient. It should be predictable, transparent, and should have an impact on the ground. So we're saying we have these promises in the UN, world forums, okay? But when you go to the community, there is only a drop of, a droplet of water in the oceans of problems that is being, put up, or that trickle down to the community level. So, if we're saying that the sustainable goals is ending until in 8 years' time, then we cannot solve it. So we're saying that if we want to build resilience now and help people survive, then we have to do more, to double our reach, to make our systems faster, to bend our laws to favor those who are being victims of climate change. Because if we do the same system right now, then people will not survive until 2, 4, 5 years. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Theresa. And I do see that there's a little bit of a same experience that Adessou was bringing up, that the support is not really reaching the communities, and that there is something that happens before it comes there. And before I give to Mayor Schrinner, I would just like to warn Sophie and Sönke that we hope that you will help with some of the solutions then on the finance side. How can we reach those communities? But I'll give you a few minutes to answer, or to think about it, sorry. Major Schrinner, there's quite some interesting things going on in Brisbane, and I've learned of the Victoria Park vision, which seeks to create Brisbane's biggest new park in 50 years. That probably requires quite some engagement with communities and figuring out how things can be shifted. I bet roads need to be moved and zoning and all these kind of things. So could you tell us how the engagement of the community has been designed and how the implementation process has been designed for this park? And if you at the same time could help us learn from that experience so that we can take it to other places, whether that's in Niger or Burkina or Canada or wherever. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and good evening, or good afternoon, everyone. Look, I wanted to probably switch the topic a little bit from the Victoria Park one to something that's really is at the forefront of our mind at the moment, and is this issue between mitigation and adaptation. Because some of you may be aware that Brisbane is a city that was built on a floodplain. It is the third largest city in Australia, but a large percentage of the city was built in that flood zone. And that was built before there were any modern town planning regulations, and so we have this legacy of large parts of the city that are prone to flooding. Now, we've had major floods throughout the city's history, but the most recent one was this year in February, where 23,000 properties were flooded. There were businesses and homes, so a significant percentage of the city was flooded. It happened previously in 2011, and then it happened in 1974, but obviously as the climate changes, these things are happening more frequently, and a big part of our strategy is getting the right balance between mitigation and adaptation. And so we have in Australia a proud record of local governments or councils or cities leading the way when it comes to climate action. Some of the state governments and national governments have been a bit slower to act, but they're catching up now, which is good. But the cities have been the forefront. And so whether it's those practical initiatives like the building new parks and becoming a carbon neutral city, which we achieved in 2017, to responding to natural disasters, we have tried very hard to get the right balance between mitigation and adaptation. Big part of adaptation is ensuring that the community is resilient, but also our infrastructure is resilient as well. And in February, we had more than $600 million of damage to community infrastructure and assets. On top of that was the damage to people's homes and businesses, which added many times more to that cost. But following the 2011 flood, as we were building the infrastructure back that was damaged after that flood, we made sure we invested heavily in adaptation and resilience of that infrastructure. And so things like our ferry terminals on the Brisbane River, we built them back in a more resilient way. Our river boardwalks, or river walks as we call them, we built them back more resiliently. And so in this flood, we had far less damage of those assets because of that investment that was made. And so an example is the ferry terminals. In 2011, 7 ferry terminals were destroyed completely. This year, none of the terminals were destroyed. There was repair work that was needed, but the investment that was made in resilience and adaptation has paid off. And so there's been some great evidence that that has been working. obviously we've worked as a city to work with the community as well, because I said resilience in the community is important. And one of the things that's been quite unique in Brisbane has been an evidence of community resilience with the creation of what we know as a mud army. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this term, but after a flood in Brisbane, it's just members of the community spontaneously coming together to support each other. In a street in Brisbane, some people were flooded, some people were not. The people that weren't flooded just come out to help the people that were flooded, and it's a spontaneous show of community resilience and helping each other. And so that's something that we really have celebrated and made sure that we champion as well, because there's things that governments can do, cities can do, but there's also things that the community can do as well. So we've focused on that community resilience as well. We made a lot of changes to town planning rules as a result of the flooding to each time improve the standards from what we've learnt with each flood. We have our Chief City Planner, Di Curry, here in the front row, who's been critical in that. We've also made sure that we help people that are at the forefront of that flooding. We have a flood resilient homes program, and that homes program is accepting that some of these homes in flood areas, they will continue to get flooded, but the people still want to live in those areas. They don't want to move out, and so we work with the homeowners to make sure their properties are more resilient by using more resilient materials as they rebuild back their homes and businesses. So there's some great examples there of how we've been working with the community, not just on mitigation, but also adaptation. I know you mentioned Victoria Park, so I'll give a quick plug to that project. It's one of our flagship projects, particularly in the lead up to the 2032 Olympic Games, where we have taken an inner city golf course and we have given it back to the people by creating the biggest new park that Brisbane has seen in 50 years. So the golfing has stopped, and now the community gets to use that green space, and we'll be investing in that green space for the benefit of the local community. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mayor Schrinner. I wish we would have time. I would ask you a question about how planning in Brisbane and how it can have an impact also on insurance premiums and such. I've heard of some very, very interesting work in Australia on how building up the adaptation structures can then also have an impact on how much your insurance costs. But let's now go over to the third area, which will look at how can we unlock climate finance for the most vulnerable communities. Sophie, you would be first on the block. And can you tell us some of the lessons learned and best practices from unlocking climate finance?
Thank you, Niklas. So I'd like to go back to some of what the speaker said about the range of needs from the communities in Niger, Burkina, Philippines, and also in developed countries. So the way UNCDF has been working over the last 10, 12 years has been to try to support and work with local governments, considering they are close to the communities, and also have, importantly, it hasn't been so much said so far, they have a mandate by law for working with their communities across a range of climate-sensitive sectors. So that's been the approach. Now the challenge is, we've heard about these communities. How can we work not just with one project in one local government? And here I'm looking also at the smaller local governments. And if we look at the countries that were mentioned, there are 262 communes in Niger, 351 in Burkina. And if we look at the very lowest level of local governments, be they in urban or rural areas, there are over 4,500 union parishes in a country like Bangladesh. So how can we support them at scale while giving the agency on how to plan and what investment to choose, select every year to these communities? So UNCDF has been working for many years in the field of decentralization and fiscal decentralization, and so has somehow utilized that expertise to think through how to achieve scale, working with so many local governments around the world, gradually. That is the vision, and I'll tell you how far we've got so far, to actually tap into those country systems. So, essentially what we are doing with a number of countries, including Jamaica, Niger, Burkina, that have been mentioned, and actually currently 34 countries, is to design a grant window within the intergovernmental fiscal transfer system. It may seem like a simple solution, but it has been piloted first in Bhutan about 10, 12 years ago, then Cambodia, then more countries in Asia, and then Africa, as well as small island developing states. So the way it works is that it's a performance-based grant system. A number of countries had performance-based grants already for local economic development, and so all the good practices from those have been utilized to actually design a performance-based climate resilience grant system, which means that local governments and their communities can access every year a grant for climate as long as they meet certain conditions of using for the intended purpose those grants. And they are also invited to work against a menu that is aligned with their own mandates, contextualized to their needs, but also aligned with the nationally determined contributions or the NAP. So it is a way for the local governments and the communities to decide what they need based on their risks, but also contribute to the bigger national agenda and international agenda when it comes also to the NDCs in particular. So we mentioned also, some speakers mentioned the importance of transparency. This particular mechanism has also been documented and informed a number of UNFCCC bodies, in particular the work of the Standing Committee on Finance, and it's referenced as an example of an initiative that is supporting domestic national budget systems to target adaptation actions at the local level while reinforcing transparency and reporting through those systems. And that is very important if we look at the other aspect of the question, which is how to access the climate funds. So most often when countries approach us to help design such financing mechanism, which is really embedded in the national system, well, we have fortunately a number of partners that sees this as a fit for purpose solution, in particular the European Union and a number of member states, and we can typically help design it, and depending on the moment, sometimes also put the first funding in it to test it. Some countries are also turning to readiness of climate funds, which can be a long endeavor, even if the amounts might be quite limited. Others are actually deciding to co-finance themselves. Senegal, for example, will put 15% in trying to set up the system, Burkina 10%, and so on. Others are actually turning to bilateral partners, which might have priorities that actually align to this issue of local development that is resilient and green, and also the government agenda, and bilateral support, which is also can also be climate finance, and we know the definition is being discussed, is often quality finance because of the dialogue that's also taking place in countries with embassies or partners. So there are different ways to activate it. And last, we also work with countries to accredit entities that are in charge of decentralization. For example, the agency in Cambodia, which is mandated for working with districts and communes, has been supported through this facility to get accredited to Green Climate Fund, and they're working now with their first concept note, which has passed CIC2, which is a first kind of milestone to move to the full-fledged funding proposal. And Cambodia is not the only one. Benin, Bhutan, others have been accredited, and they then can go through the route of direct access, which is the shortest route, possibly, if you're not a large city, which could hope one day to get accredited. If you're a smaller local government, a metropolitan district in Ghana, also possibly this is the shortest route to go through this kind of national implementing entity. And from there, that entity to serve a large number of communes, local governments, districts, be it urban or rural. There are actually currently 12 countries supported and working towards that direct access, and we hope that it's going to also inform the thinking about how the UNFCCC financial mechanism operate. There are discussions currently on moving towards more programmatic approaches, but also perhaps systemic approach, and actually channeling some of the climate finance in country systems with all the checks and balances can be a powerful way to accelerate action. Currently, with the 34 countries engaged, 17 have activated that grant system. And if it was to go to scale in all the countries that are actually demanding that solution, it could be 500 million people that would be served. So that is one particular solution that is actually already in motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Actually, if you go to a lot of these events, you will hear many community organizations saying that you all talk about billions and hundreds of millions, but we never see that money. So I think, Sophie, a little bit what you talked about there's an importance that it's connected to the NDCs. So that's when you establish the NDCs or any sectoral plan, it's important that communities are participating in that process. I would not underestimate either the importance of being able to measure the impact, because most capital will look for some kind of key performance indicator. So when we look at community adaptation and mitigation efforts, we have to be able to measure it. Sönke, I think we're fairly back on our time, so I'm not actually going to rush you. So you got a little bit of time now here before we need to end. Sönke, the floor is yours, and I would like you to share with us your experience in creating and strengthening risk sharing and management to unlock finance. So your experience of insurance schemes and risk management, please share that with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, and also thank you for not rushing me. And congratulations to the panel that we made up for the time. I'm representing United Nations University, Institute for Environment and Human Security, and at the level of the institute, we very much believe that effective action relies on stakeholder engagement and also the ability, I think Sophie, you said agency, of these stakeholders to articulate their needs. And I think that's also an important notion when it's about bringing, for example, adaptation needs to international actors, be it climate finance actors or be it capital market actors. We do this through different projects at the Institute. We look, for example, at projects as well as methodologies. We look at urban labs, for example, to engage communities in Latin and Southern America. And we also have a new project on a more data-driven approach to do the same thing with Indian cities. UNU EHS, as part of UNU EHS, I'm representing MCII, Munich Climate Insurance Initiative. We are focusing on financial protection approaches. You already put that into your question. I'm also representing that organization as the executive director. And we are working through the entire arch, from setting the right policy and governance frameworks to getting the risk understandings, and with that also the articulation of needs of especially most vulnerable people and communities. That's in our mandate, to implementing financial protection approaches on the ground. And I think the challenging question you posed to me is exactly what we are asking ourselves and when we do our risk analysis and risk and engagement. Just to give you some idea on how this can look like in reality, we are working with a methodology and a framework called Economics of Climate Change Adaptation. And what it does is using risk quantification tools by the insurance and reinsurance industry, but with an open data approach, and using that to discuss and guide stakeholders to a process that leads to the quantification, articulation and quantification of their resilience needs in the future. And you can use that at any given scale, so you can do this with local communities, you can do this at the city level, and it's helpful to translate the needs, as I said, to, for example, concrete projects, but also, for example, in a political economy situation that often exists for the communities that we are trying to cater for. It is helpful to have this in a way black on white on what different adaptation options can do to you and what are, for example, the investment criteria. And it works the way that the stakeholders agree on the predominant risks, look at exposure and vulnerabilities, And then also looking at what are the adaptation and resilience options, including financial protection options, including insurance. And then through the methodology, it will give you a ranking on what are the most cost-effective measures. But it's not only cost effectiveness, we also worked with the same methodology to look at alternative currency, I could say, not only money, but for example also well-being impact as one idea. This can then easily be translated into, for example, CAPEX requirements of commercial lending actors or multilateral development banks, and we already have examples where our analysis or such type of analysis, not only our analysis, such type of analysis can then be used to facilitate an investment in this space. And I think that's basically what it is about. We have to bridge. I think in the beginning we heard we have to go with a local knowledge. But unfortunately that local knowledge is not necessarily easily to be translated to the international level or to the level where the capital is. So we have to kind of bridge that, and one idea or one methodology is quantification, as I quickly summarized. And yeah, just as one approach, it is important to not only see the technical side of such engagement. I think it's even more important to take the time, and these type of studies and engagements, they take time, up to a year, to take the time to discuss both the calibration and the calibrations of the models, the different options, as well as the results, to have sustainable impact and to articulate the needs at the end of the day.
Thank you, Sönke. Just having a quick look at the time. Excellent. We're going to be able to do a little bit of question and answer, and it's going to be a little bit modified. It will be a question to Theresa, Major Schrinner, and Adessou. So the rest of you can lean back and breathe out. Okay, so you've heard now that it can be done there if you connect well to the NDCs of your country, your respective countries, if there's good measurements, if there is help with accrediting various organizations for direct access to the various climate funds. You're representing slums, communities, and a big city in Australia. Do you buy this? Would you think that this would service your needs? And we'll start with Major Schrinner. Would this help Brisbane?
Well, to be entirely honest, I think that Brisbane should be helping others. So the reality is in Australia we have quite a well-advanced system in place to support different cities and local governments and communities through natural disasters, for example. And so 3 levels of government all contribute funding and support to make more resilient communities, and the focus has been on building back better, whether it's building back after floods or cyclones or bushfires. There's been a big investment that has been made. And so I think the reality is we should be doing our best as a nation in Australia to do what we can to support others, because we are in a very fortunate position compared to many places, and we see that as an important leadership role to support others. And it's great that Australia is back in terms of our global position and approach when it comes to real action on climate change. So in terms of whether the international systems will help Brisbane, probably not, but we should be supporting others.
Okay, thank you for that. And So that means that, that you have pretty much the access to the resources that you need for now through private sector and taxpayers' dollars and so on to implement, build up that resilience across the board. You don't have to answer that. Because now we'll go then to Theresa and Adessou. Now in addition to the NDC routes, the opportunities that Sönke talked about, there's also on the table now an offer from Brisbane to help you. So how would you see, are we on a right track or are we not meeting the needs that you may have on the ground? Theresa, let's start with you.
So these conferences, you know, for me, it is always mixed emotions when, you know, going to these conferences because, you know, you feel the hope when you are at the conference. But when you go to the community level, it's a different story. So yeah. Do I buy this? I would like to. Okay. I would like, and I hope that this, the promises of this COP is really going to, you know, build impact in the community level. But there are certain realities on the ground that, you know, it's been in the system for so long that it needs more of, you know, dismantling the system, these kinds of system. For example, the procurement system. You cannot say to your government, we are, you know, we are flooded. We are in this, you know, we have been affected by floods. Can you help us? They will have, you know, a year of planning, budgeting, and all. And at the end of the day, they will tell you, we cannot fund this project because you are an illegal settler. So how do you connect that? How do you manage that? So, of course, there has been, you know, strategies that are being modified right now, but this has to, you know, this conversation should continue and should build from top below and then from ground up. Because if these people are not, you know, does not stay in the conversation, does not have the longevity to discuss, to haggle, to, you know, to fight for what is truly rightful, their rights to be, you know, to be protected by their government, they will, you know, they will just not survive. Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you, Theresa. Adessou, I'm afraid you only have 1 minute. The floor is yours.
It's more than sufficient. Thank you so much. First of all, I want to say, at the community level, there is nothing called adaptation, neither there is no adaptation or mitigation at the community level. I don't know what you mean by that. They just need to live in a very dignified manner. That's what community need. That's the first point. The second point is, I think it's important to shift from short-term project to processes. And processes means long-term process that really try to respond to the need of the community rather than meeting some objectives put on paper. That's the second point. And the third point for me is, unless we have a process that empower local communities, resilience will remain a very theoretical issue. Finally, coming here, this COP is very crowded. Decisions are coming from different areas. I have the chance to be in the negotiation room, but as far as we will not put the reality, what's happening on the ground, in the plates, and really and honestly discuss around this topic, I'm afraid we'll use a lot of resources, but the outcome will be very, very low. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adessou. We're on the nose of 2:45 when we're supposed to end. So I would like to thank the panelists. We were 9 people on the panel, and we were able to shave off 15 minutes from our presentation. So that's a feat on its own. Thank you so much. I do take that while there is hope in the negotiations and there are solutions out there, the UN agencies and countries, we still have quite some way to go to really connect down to community level and making sure that those billions will translate into billions of actions at community level. So we have a little bit of homework still. Thank you all, and thanks again to UN Habitat for organizing this event. Thank you so much. The event is closed.